Hey, social work students, welcome to week 12 of Social Work 321. This is a great week, lots to learn. We are focusing this week on empathy. We're going to talk a lot about empathy today. And I decided to wear a dress for the first time in weeks, and Daisy's also wearing her little lollipop dress. As some of you know, my nickname's Lolly, so yes, my dog has a lollipop dress. Yeah. Great visual aid, right? Have a few other visual aids that we'll get to in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about empathy and what's going on this week. So you have a quiz, and one of the definitions that you'll need to know for your quiz is the capability approach. This has come up in recent decades. It's both a moral and a political philosophy. And it's about a theoretical framework about well-being, development, and justice. So some of the predecessors of this idea are Aristotle and Karl Marx. So the capability approach, it's a normative approach to human welfare that concentrates on the actual capability of persons to achieve their well-being, rather than on their mere right or freedom to do so. So their ability to be able to overcome rather than their right to do that. It was conceived in the 1980s as an alternative approach to welfare economics. And it's an approach that brings together a range of ideas that were previously excluded or not adequately formulated. The traditional approaches were more about the economics of welfare. So the core focus of the capability approach is on what individuals are able to do, not necessarily what can be done for them. So I hope you have a good understanding of that definition. Let's talk a little bit about empathy and what it is, how important it is. I know that I use this word a lot. One of the first things that I asked you in Social Work 101 is what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Empathy, of course, is feeling someone's emotion rather than simply feeling sorry for them. A better working definition might be the action of understanding and being aware of another person's feelings or emotions. So simply put, empathy is the ability to step into someone else's shoes and to feel and understand what they feel and understand. So here's my first visual aid for the day. Yeah, this is about motivation. And I think that that's a really important question to ask, is what motivates you? We've talked about that in a past Zoom meeting. But what motivates Daisy? Does this motivate you, Daisy? Yeah, you love it, don't you? This is Daisy's favorite toy. Yeah, very motivating, but she's still not really motivated enough to play fetch. Yeah, you just like to hug it, right? Okay, there it is. Love on your toy. Okay, good job. So if empathy is a motivating factor for a social worker, if compassion is a motivating factor, then empathy will be used. Here is my second visual aid. Or third, since Daisy's my first. This is the DSM-4. We now have the DSM-5. Very thick book. If you haven't seen one of these yet, you'll become very familiar with it in your diagnostic class when you get into graduate school. And this is, every mental health professional has a copy of one of these. And this is the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So within the pages of this book, a very thick one, are all the mental health diagnoses. And so one of the things that I'd like us to talk about a little bit today is how to use empathy depending on the diagnosis that you're dealing with. So with this capabilities approach, with the strengths perspective, we are going to have an empathic approach to our clients, but we're also going to have that understanding that they are capable. They have the ability to overcome. That confidence is going to be expressed from us, but also that compassion and that empathy, that validating of their emotional state is so very, very important. And that's another thing that might pop up on your quiz is understanding why validating is important, recognizing that when we validate another person, we are empowering them. Why is it important to validate another person, and how do you do it? So when you validate, let's say that you've got a client who has some real anger management issues. They're very, very angry. They express anger a lot. So what's underneath that anger? If it's fear or frustration, that's the emotion that we're validating. Let's talk a little bit about why empathy helps a client work from their frontal lobe rather than their amygdala. I gotta tell you a story first. So my husband, I've talked about him a little bit. He's a great guy. He's very athletic, likes to run marathons and ultra marathons. So one Saturday for fun, we took our bicycles down to the strip. Now this was fairly early on in the coronavirus months, okay? And we thought, so the strip was, there weren't a whole lot of people, but we were on our bikes. And so, we had masks and hand sanitizer and everything. And my husband has a couple of very, very nice bikes. And so he took, we would ride him around, then we'd stop and walk around and look around, and he would lock them up. And very meticulous about making sure that they were locked. And I could tell that he was concerned about that. And so we came out after going to lunch and being inside a casino for a while. We came out and our bikes were gone. So my husband panicked, and he was so, he's this awesome professional athletic guy, but boy, when he panics, guess what? The guy works from his amygdala, not his frontal lobe. And he's like, oh no, I left my keys. The keys to the truck were in the pocket of the bike. They could have they'll just go to the parking lot and, blip on the key fob and figure out that his really cool brand new truck, and steal it. So he's like, I've got to run check on the truck. And I'm like, okay, you go ahead and do that. I'm going to go talk to the security people of this casino. And so while he panicked and ran and did that, I talked to the casino personnel. Sure enough, the bike lock had been cut by the casino personnel because they don't like you. They want you to have your bike in a better, more secure location underground than out on the street where my husband had locked them. And so anyway, I was able to get a hold of him. Long story short, it was, Doug, quit working from your amygdala, take a deep breath and use your frontal lobe. Yeah. The bikes are okay. Nobody stole them from us. So when we're working with clients that are having these issues, empathy can really be empowering. Empathy is one of those tools that you have at your disposal that can help someone when you're expressing that compassion and that empathy, you're feeling their emotions, you are validating them just by that act of empathy. Some of the validating words that you'll use is, that must be very frustrating. Are you okay? That must have been really hard. Those validating statements are very important. So where does empathy come from? And is it genetic? Are we born with it? Or is it something that we learn? Are you born being an empath, or can you learn that over time? So recent studies have suggested that that we're both genetically predisposed to being empaths, or our environment also plays a role in how each of us develop and process empathy. So if you have very empathetic parents, if that's what's normal to you, then you might have an easier time expressing it. I've often told you guys that if you've gone through some challenging situations, then perhaps that empathy is more built in because of that. Certain parts of our brain tend to regulate empathy. Therefore, some people's ability to develop empathy can be more difficult if that area of the brain is not properly functioning. So we know that people on the autism spectrum, that the frontal lobe is damaged. And if your frontal lobe doesn't work effectively and efficiently, then that can play a role. Now, one of the things that we also know is that you can build pathways in your brain that will help experience empathy more. For example, when a child, if you are empathic with a child and tell them those compassionate words, then they actually create pathways in their brain to those good feelings, and they learn those skills. And our environment really has a lot to do with it. The majority of studies suggest how we're raised and our life experiences tend to make the largest impact on developing empathy. So what if you weren't raised with empathy and you recognize how important it is and you want to be a social worker? Can empathy be learned? Absolutely. Though some people may have a more difficult time learning and understanding empathy, it doesn't mean that they can't. My son, who has been diagnosed with autism, is one of the most empathic people that I know, but he does it in a different way than my children who have inherited that empath quality. He does it by rote. He does it by mimicking, by learning, and he recognizes that what people want is to be understood, and so he has learned the words. Does that mean he's faking it? No, because he cares deeply, but it's just a different way of learning empathy. So it's like the development of any social skill. The key to learning is experience, learning, and practice. So those three things: experiencing it, learning it, and practicing it. I hope you all are practicing your empathy skills with your friends and family. It's so important. It allows you to better connect with people and foster healthy relationships, and that's something that you all need. You remember, being a social worker is a job, okay? That's a job. Your life is your family. Your life is those connections that you make with your significant others, with your friends, your family, your children, your spouse. But empathy encourages us to respect and care for each other. You probably, if you're a built-in empath, you might have been attracted to someone who's not so much. That's okay. Opposites attract sometimes. But you need people who go into social work. You know, we haven't talked much this semester about self-care, but it's important. You need to learn self-care. You need to develop strong, supportive individuals in your life. That support system is so vital for a social worker. Empathy encourages us to show compassion, understanding for others. It helps make our communities and our homes better places to live. And if you think about the most effective leaders, they're empathic, aren't they? They're empathetic. Is that how you say it? Yeah. They're empaths. They get the value of that. And leaders who aren't as effective don't always get that, or they don't have the same skills at expressing it. So, how can we develop and build empathy? There's several approaches that you can take. First, learn about the benefits of showing empathy. Identify and read the emotions in others. Figure out how to do that. You know, spend some time observing. When Doug and I were first dating, okay, he was broke, I was broke. So for a fun date, we'd go to the airport and we would people watch, and he would make up stories about people passing by. But observing is an important skill. We've talked about that. Reading the emotions in others. Doug would make up these long, drawn-out stories about people and their families, and you know, we have continued to do that with our children, with our grandchildren, and it's really fun. But part of what it does is it helps you put yourself in other people's shoes. It helps you explain their behavior. It helps you understand their motivations for their behavior, right? You want to understand what motivates people. So when you understand their story, when you observe them, when you start to learn how to read body language, you will better understand. And a big part of understanding is understanding your own emotions as well. recognizing when you are triggered by a client. And, we use that word trigger, but what does it mean? A trigger is on a gun, right? When you pull that trigger on the gun, what happens? A bullet's released. When you're triggered emotionally by something that's said in a session, that's kind of what it feels like. It's such a surprise. And so you need to learn to expect those emotions. If you had a traumatic childhood, if you were abused, and then you sit with a client who starts to share something and something comes up for you, you have to learn how to deal with the emotional impact of that, and how to keep your own emotions checked. Recognize there's a time and a place to express those emotions. There's a reason you have a supervisor your first 3,000 hours. And that should be a safe place to express some of those feelings that you're having. Yeah, puppies are a good place too. Puppies are good. Okay. In order to be empathetic, you need to be able to understand how others are feeling. When people express their feelings verbally, we listen. When they're expressing them non-verbally, we validate and we reflect what we suspect is their primary emotion. We need to improve our ability reading nonverbal signs. It can be done with practice. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. Use your imagination. Go to the airport, watch people walk by, make up stories with your significant other or your kids or whatever, and gain a better understanding of why someone would feel the way they do. What is motivating them? You've heard the idea, before you judge a man, walk a mile in his shoes, and that's what we're doing as social workers. We have to understand their experiences, and we do that by imagining how it would feel to be in their situation, and it helps us develop a deeper understanding. So start with yourself, understand your own emotions, and learn to empathize with yourself. Accept your feelings. I had one client who felt like it was sinful to ever feel angry, to ever feel frustrated. She felt like that, and so she would push those emotions down. And as we talked, one of the goals that we set together, I challenged her to share her anger with someone in her family, to share those strong emotions. And she just thought that was wrong. And I helped her understand that there's a big difference between sin and emotions that are there for a reason, that are trying to tell you something, like anger, right? What's it covering up? And we made some really good progress. So as you set goals with clients, I want to talk a little bit about how empathy is used in setting those goals. And I also want to talk about how empathy can be used with different diagnoses. So what if you have a client who has a substance abuse issue, and there is domestic violence going on as a result of the substance abuse issue? So it's kind of hard, especially if you're triggered by that. It's hard to be empathetic. So remembering that everybody who commits a domestic violence was at one time a victim can be very helpful. That can be very helpful. What about working with children? Children really, sometimes kids are diagnosed with serious mental health issues, but most of the time, children are just the victims of the stuff around them. And those diagnoses are different. For example, you cannot diagnose an individual with oppositional defiant. You can't diagnose them with anti-personality disorder until they're 18. Before that, it's oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, which are very different because children are different, and they don't have their brains aren't as fully grown as adults are, obviously. And so in working with children, And for some of us, kids can be incredibly manipulative and they know it. They push our buttons, but you're not going to allow your buttons to be pushed. Imagine when you're working with children and you can practice on your own kids or nieces and nephews, or whoever the little people are in your life. But imagine that every child that you work with has a remote control. They have a remote control to your emotions, and they push those buttons to try to get you to respond in a certain way. And you don't, because you are in control. Your empathy is going to be expressed not by expressing strong emotions, but by not expressing those strong emotions when you're with children. Children need adults who are in control. They need adults that are not, their feathers are not ruffled by whatever they say. You know, if you have a child that comes to you and tells you that they were sexually abused, you are going to be empathetic. You are going to validate the strong emotions that they have. That must have been really hard. But you're not going to be shocked, okay? Because the problem is when we express shock for something like that happening, a lot of times children will interpret that as that it was wrong, that it was their fault, okay? One of the first things that I say when someone tells me that they were sexually abused when they were a child, or if a child tells me that, the first thing I say is, you did not deserve that. That was not your fault. And if that happened to you, you need to say it to yourself. And I'm going to say it right now. That was not your fault. Okay? Remember that. And remember to share that when you're working with kids. That's an important part of empathy. You can feel, and you're going to feel it. You're going to feel anger that an innocent child was exploited like that, but you're not going to express that. When we express anger as social workers, it can be interpreted in a wrong way, okay? So as social workers, we're going to get really skilled at expressing our primary emotions. It's okay to be vulnerable. You can express those vulnerable emotions like fear, like frustration, like confusion. It's okay to be vulnerable. Remember what Stephen Covey wrote about having clear expectations, about beginning with the end in mind. We need to set realistic expectations for ourselves, for our clients. We need to be human. Perfect people are never happy. Have you noticed that? And you don't need to be perfect to be a social worker. You just need to be there, you know? And it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to use your words. It's okay to recognize what motivates you as a social worker. One of the important concepts that help with empathy is the idea of emotional intelligence. And I know that many of you have heard that term. There was a really wonderful book that was written a couple of decades ago, I think, called Emotional Intelligence. And it talks about how we have an IQ, an intelligent quotient, and we have an EQ, an emotional quotient. And some people are more skilled at emoting than others, right? And sometimes, and a lot of times in our culture, we're judged by our IQ rather than our EQ. Can you help another person build their emotional quotient? Yes, you can. Your EQ is very important. How your emotional intelligence is demonstrated is vital for social workers. And to be emotionally intelligent means that you have the ability of reading people. You have the ability to feel what's going on. It is a great skill. It's not just a gift. And for some of you it is. But for those of you that don't feel like you have that gift, guess what? You can create that skill. And you can practice it and get better at it. And there's one of your videos that I love that I include. And have you guys noticed how many of these supplemental materials I include? I love these little video clips, like the Meet the Robinsons, where the little boy is congratulated for failing. Remember, he invents the little peanut butter and jelly thing and it explodes all over. And the family, the Robinsons, don't tell him how terrible that was. They congratulate him. So that's a great skill as an empath, to congratulate others when they fail. You know, you relapsed. Good for you. That's one out of the way. And now you can move on and progress and get sober. I'm so excited for you, right? It's okay. And there's a wonderful presentation through Toastmasters called Falling Forward. And Daniel LaCroix gives this presentation. And the first thing he does is fall flat on his face. And then he gives his speech from the floor of the stage. And he talks about how he fell forward. And that's progress. Falling is progress as long as you're pointed in the right direction. Okay, that is all the material I have for you this week. But good luck on your quiz and your assignment on empathy, on your discussion board assignment. I'm excited to read it. And please don't hesitate to text, call, or email me if you have any questions or comments. Say bye, Daisy. Say bye.
Bye.